She was an absolutely stunning, charming, and beautiful woman. A true enigma, she became involved in a series of controversies that ended up dividing opinions, both among her most devoted followers and her fiercest enemies. She is one of the most well-known historical figures of ancient Scotland, not only for her enigmatic personality and extreme attitudes, but also for her controversial, terrifying, and tragic fate. Today, we will also discuss her relationship with another queen, her cousin, Elizabeth I. The two ruled neighboring kingdoms, exchanged letters constantly, and although they never met in person, in the end, one ultimately ordered the other's execution by beheading. And if you're already enjoying this video, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this story, and give the video a like to support our channel. In today's video, Mary Stuart, the Scottish queen who was beheaded. It was a turbulent time. Scotland, England, and France had been struggling for political power for centuries, but the situation would become even more complicated with the addition of religious divisions. On one side, the Catholics. On the other, the Protestants. Protestant England had conquered Catholic Scotland. And it was in this context that Mary Stuart was born, on December 8, 1542, at Linlithgow Palace in Scotland. She was the daughter of King James V and his second wife, Mary of Guise, and was the only legitimate heir to survive. James V was deeply disappointed upon learning that his wife had given birth to a daughter. This newborn, besides belonging to the House of Stuart, was also the granddaughter of Margaret Tudor, the elder sister of King Henry VIII, making her the great niece of the English king. Mary Stuart ascended the Scottish throne just 6 days after her birth, following her father's death after the Battle of Solway Moss, likely due to drinking contaminated water during the campaign. The infant was frail, and few expected her to survive long. However, she carried the last hope for the survival of the House of Stuart. Her birth caused a great stir among Europe's rival powers. The arrival of a female heir was significant news for those seeking to annex Scotland, as whoever married her would gain control over her kingdom. Henry VIII seized the opportunity to propose a marriage between Mary and his son, Edward, aiming to unite Scotland and England while preventing Scotland from allying with his greatest rival, France. And when the Queen was just 6 months old, the Treaty of Greenwich was signed on July 1, 1543, stipulating that Mary would marry Edward at the age of 10 and move to England. On September 9, 1543, Mary Stuart was crowned Queen of Scotland. In December of that same year, the Scottish Parliament rejected the Treaty of Greenwich, prompting Henry VIII to launch the Rough Wooing, a military campaign intended to force Mary's marriage to Edward. English forces carried out numerous attacks on Scottish territory, and the young queen was hidden in various places to prevent her from being kidnapped by the English. Mary's mother, Mary of Guise, resisted. She belonged to one of France's most powerful aristocratic and Catholic families. She sought help from the French king, Henry II, who agreed to assist her on the condition that she promise Mary in marriage to his son, the Dauphin of France. On January 27, 1548, an agreement was signed between Henry II and Mary of Guise, and the French monarch sent a fleet of 140 ships and 6,000 men to Scotland to take Mary Stuart, who departed for France at the age of just 5. In doing so, Mary of Guise secured a stable and safe future for her daughter and preserved hope for the Catholic Stuart dynasty. Mary arrived in a world completely different from the one she had known, living a very secure childhood with all the comforts and care imaginable. The French court was splendid. The kings resided in immense castles, finely decorated with lavish details and extreme refinement. She spent 13 years in this new reality, becoming accustomed to a life of pomp and glamour. Life was wonderful for Mary. She could do as she pleased. She was loved and cherished by everyone, and she was constantly flattered. Many historians argue that this lifestyle shaped her personality, making her a strong-willed and demanding young woman, something that, in her case, proved to be a disadvantage. She continued to live in this bubble even when she was no longer in it. She craved constant praise and adulation, expecting everyone to go to great lengths to please her. But of course, real life was not like that. During her childhood, she lived an authentic fairy tale in France. These were undoubtedly the happiest years of her life, as she was adored by all upon her arrival. She was a lively, beautiful, and intelligent child, and the favorite of the French court, except for one person, the Queen Consort, Catherine de' Medici. Mary was remarkably beautiful and tall by 16th century standards, standing at 1.80 meters, 5 feet 11 inches, while her future husband, Francis, was stammering, unusually short, and always had a delicate, frail, sickly appearance. They grew up together, and Mary loved him. In time, she understood they would marry, but the love she felt for him was more fraternal than romantic. She learned to play musical instruments, read and wrote poetry, practiced horse riding, falconry, and embroidery, and was fluent in 6 languages: French, Italian, Latin, Spanish, Greek, and her native Scots. Her maternal grandmother, Antoinette de Bourbon, was another strong influence in her childhood, acting as one of her main advisors. She grew up preparing for her future role as Queen Consort of France. However, this French education gradually distanced her from her Scottish roots. France had now become her entire world, and even the French court discouraged her from deepening her knowledge of Scotland, the country where she was born, and of which she was queen. This alienation would prove catastrophic for Mary in the future. She developed a love for French fashion, which remained with her for the rest of her life. In her teenage years, she was already known across Europe as one of the most elegant women in the realm. In April 1558, she married the Dauphin Francis in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. It was a splendid wedding, full of luxury and refinement, intended to present this new union to the world and reaffirm the power of the French court. But behind all this grandeur, the intrigues surrounding Mary continued, and she signed a secret contract in which she ceded Scotland and her claim to the English and French thrones in the event of her death without heirs. She likely saw no reason for concern, as she was married to the Dauphin of France, and at just 15 years old was living an idyllic life. Meanwhile, Europe was being torn apart by wars between Catholics and Protestants. Edward VI, a Protestant, had died in July 1553 and was succeeded by his half-sister, Mary I, a Catholic, who herself passed away 5 years later, in November 1558. She was then succeeded by her only surviving half-sister, Elizabeth I, a Protestant. The year of Elizabeth's coronation coincided with the year of Mary's marriage to the Dauphin Francis. Under the Third Act of Succession, passed by the English Parliament in 1543, Elizabeth was recognized as the rightful heir to the English throne. However, Henry VIII's will had explicitly excluded the House of Stuart from the English line of succession. Yet for Catholic France, and for all Catholics in general, Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, had annulled a legitimate and indissoluble marriage with his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. In their eyes, Elizabeth was nothing more than a bastard daughter of the king, an illegitimate child in the sight of God, and had no rightful claim to the English throne. Thus, Mary Stuart was seen as the true Queen of England, being a direct descendant of Margaret Tudor. With this justification, King Henry II of France proclaimed that his son and daughter-in-law were the rightful rulers of England, even having the English royal coat of arms displayed alongside Francis's French and Mary's Scottish ones. This act ignited a conflict between Mary Stuart and Elizabeth of Orkney that would persist until the very end. Henry II was fatally wounded in a jousting accident and died on July 10, 1559. With this, Francis, then only 15 years old, ascended the throne, making 16-year-old Mary the Queen Consort of France. Mary now held the crowns of both Scotland and France, feeling entirely secure under the protection of the French. What could possibly go wrong? 2 deaths in the year 1560 would turn her world upside down. In an unexpected twist, Mary Stuart's tranquil, secure, and refined life would change forever. And tragically, for the worse. Mary of Guise, her mother and regent in Scotland, passed away on June 11, 1560, and her husband, Francis II, died on December 5th of the same year from an ear infection that developed into an abscess in his brain. Mary was devastated. Her mother-in-law, Catherine de' Medici, became regent for the 10-year-old Charles IX. With Catherine now in power, Mary Stuart was no longer welcome in France. At just 18 years old, she returned to Scotland 9 months after her husband's death, a land of which she was queen, but that she barely knew, as she had not set foot there since she was 5 years old. She had been raised to be Queen of France. Ruling Scotland had never been part of her plan. She left France with deep sorrow and spent the entire journey back in tears. In August 1561, Mary returned to her homeland after 13 years of absence, only to find a nation in political turmoil. The kingdom was divided between Catholic and Protestant factions, with her illegitimate half-brother, James Stuart, Earl of Moray, leading the Protestant cause. She suddenly found herself in an overwhelmingly hostile environment. Scotland was now a Protestant country, forced to accept a Catholic queen. Upon her arrival, in an attempt to ease tensions, Mary took the throne and made a compromise with the Scottish people. She would recognize Protestantism as the official religion of Scotland, but would continue practicing her Catholic faith in private. Far from calming the situation, this decision only fueled more conflict. On one side, the Catholics were deeply disappointed with the Queen, who, despite being Catholic, had accepted Protestant rule. On the other, Protestants were outraged that she continued to hold Catholic Mass in private. In fact, Mary's very first Mass in Scotland was disrupted by Protestant protesters. On top of this, she immediately noticed the stark differences between Scotland and France, and she did not like them at all. It was a massive culture shock for her. Upon arriving in Edinburgh, she thought it was the most primitive place in the world, as if she had traveled back to the Middle Ages. The castles were cold, the decor was plain and unrefined, nothing compared to the magnificence and splendor of France. To remedy this, she attempted to introduce elements of the French court into Scotland, bringing in music, dancing, and lavish social events. However, this only fueled the opposition. The Protestant reformer John Knox became one of her fiercest critics, condemning her for attending Mass, for her elaborate clothing, and for engaging in social festivities, even going so far as to declare that she was condemned to hell. Mary summoned Knox to her court to debate with him, but their discussion proved fruitless. Later, she accused him of treason, but he was acquitted and set free. Her tolerance toward the rising Protestant power was a complete disappointment to the Catholic faction. To make matters worse, she kept her Protestant half-brother as her principal advisor. She could not trust the Scottish nobles, nor could she be certain of their loyalty. Among them were both Protestants and Catholics, all eager to spread rumors and stir conflicts that could ultimately lead to her downfall. Instead of focusing on the pressing matters of her own kingdom, Mary set her sights on England, sending an ambassador to the English court to plead her case as the rightful heir presumptive. In her letter, she boldly stated, "I am your closest relative. We are both of the same house and blood." Elizabeth I was both astonished and outraged by such audacity. Refusing to name an heir, fearing that doing so would incite conspiracies to overthrow her, Elizabeth responded shrewdly, avoiding a clear answer. She merely assured the ambassador that she knew no one more fitting than Mary to succeed her. The two queens continued exchanging letters, and arrangements were made in late 1561 for them to meet in August 1562. However, Elizabeth canceled in July due to the ongoing religious wars in France. Meanwhile, Mary decided it was time to secure an heir and began searching for a husband among European royalty. Elizabeth sought to neutralize her by proposing a marriage to Robert Dudley, a Protestant English nobleman and her personal favorite, whom she trusted completely, believing she could control him. Elizabeth promised that if Mary married Dudley, she would name her as heir to the English throne. But Mary rejected the proposal. In February 1561, While still mourning Francis, Mary met Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Both were grandchildren of Margaret Tudor. She fell deeply in love with him. He was tall, strong, and handsome. On July 29, 1565, they married at Holyrood Palace. Although both were Catholic, they lacked the papal dispensation required for direct cousins. Elizabeth viewed this marriage as a direct threat. Since both Mary and Henry were descendants of her aunt, they could claim the English throne. Enraged, Elizabeth believed the union should never have happened without her consent, as Henry was both her cousin and an English subject. But Mary had married Lord Darnley for love, not for political gain. However, the marriage quickly turned into a disaster. Darnley grew arrogant, demanding more power while shirking his responsibilities. He was boastful, openly unfaithful to Mary, with both women and men, spending his time in brothels and causing scandals. Worse still, he showed no loyalty or honor to his wife, constantly switching allegiances based on his own interests. Tensions escalated further when Mary became pregnant in October 1565. Darnley grew jealous of her close friendship with her Catholic secretary, David Rizzio. Rumors, completely unfounded, spread that Rizzio was the true father of Mary's child, fueled by conspirators eager to destabilize her reign. In March 1566, Darnley, now reckless and paranoid, conspired with Protestant lords. On March 9th, during a dinner at Holyrood Palace, he and a group of nobles stormed in and brutally stabbed Rizzio 56 times in Mary's presence. This atrocity shattered any remaining respect Mary had for her husband. The plot only exposed his incompetence as a ruler. Seeking refuge, Mary moved to Edinburgh Castle, where she gave birth to her son James on June 19, 1566. His baptism in the Catholic faith was a grand affair, further alarming the English, who saw Mary and her heir as an increasing threat to Elizabeth's rule. Meanwhile, Darnley was staying at Kirkfield Abbey near Edinburgh. On the night of February 9th, Mary visited him before attending the wedding of her servant, Bastian Pages. In the early hours of February 10th, a massive explosion destroyed the abbey. Darnley's body was found in the garden, but he had been strangled rather than killed by the blast. Suspicion immediately fell on Mary and her close ally, Lord Bothwell. Elizabeth wrote to Mary, addressing the rumors. "I would not be a true cousin nor an affectionate friend if I did not tell you what the world is saying. They say that instead of arresting the murderers, you are idly watching as they escape, that you will seek no vengeance upon those who have brought you so much pleasure." On April 21st, 1567, Mary visited her son in Stirling for what would unknowingly be the last time. Then something shocking happened. On April 24th, she was abducted by James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, and his men. The circumstances remain mysterious. Bothwell was her most ardent supporter, yet also the prime suspect in Darnley's murder. Whether willingly or not, Mary was taken to Dunbar Castle, where she may have been assaulted. Afterward, on May 15th, Mary and Bothwell returned to the capital, where, against all advice, she married him in a Protestant ceremony. Bothwell had divorced his wife only 12 days earlier. Initially, Mary believed the nobles supported the marriage, but she soon discovered otherwise. And her union with the prime suspect in her husband's murder, the King Consort, became immensely unpopular. Catholics deemed the marriage illegal, as they did not recognize Lord Bothwell's divorce or the validity of the Protestant ceremony. Both Protestants and Catholics were shocked that Mary had married such a man. The problems brought by this marriage quickly overwhelmed the Queen. The Scottish nobles, known as the Confederate Lords, raised an army against Mary Stuart and her new husband. Though Mary's forces outnumbered the opposition by 2 or even 3 times, they were ultimately defeated. Her army all but vanished due to desertion and negotiations. It was a humiliating defeat for Mary. Lord Bothwell was exiled, fleeing to Denmark, where he descended into madness and died in 1578. The victorious lords took Mary to Edinburgh, where crowds accused her of adultery and murder. Yet she still believed she would be treated as a queen. Instead, she was imprisoned and the following night transported to Loch Leven Castle, an island fortress accessible only by boat. While there, she suffered a miscarriage, losing the twins she was carrying. On July 24, 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her 1-year-old son, James. Her half-brother, James Stuart, was appointed regent. On May 2, 1568, Mary escaped from Loch Leven Castle with the help of loyal supporters. She managed to raise an army of 6,000 men in an attempt to reclaim her throne, but she was defeated once again and fled south. Before leaving, she had written a letter to the English queen, pleading for assistance. However, without waiting for a response, she crossed into England. Mary seemingly expected Elizabeth to help her regain her throne. Elizabeth proceeded with caution, ordering an inquiry into whether Mary had been involved in Darnley's murder. On May 18, 1568, local officials took Mary Stuart into protective custody at Carlisle Castle. In June, she was transferred to Bolton Castle, further from the Scottish border but not too close to London. Mary persistently requested an audience with Elizabeth Ice. The English queen, however, delayed their meeting, explaining that she first needed to determine whether Mary bore any guilt in her husband's murder. Only after this matter was settled, Elizabeth assured her, could they meet without issue. Meanwhile, Mary's loyal supporters in Scotland waged a civil war against her half-brother, the regent, and his advisors. Between October 1568 and January 1569, an inquiry took place, first in York and later in Westminster. James Stuart presented what he claimed was damning evidence, the so-called casket letters. These consisted of 8 unsigned letters, allegedly written by Mary to Lord Bothwell, including a love sonnet. They were considered crucial in determining her culpability in Darnley's assassination. To this day, the authenticity of the casket letters remains a point of great historical controversy. It is impossible to prove whether they were genuine or forged. Thus, Elizabeth concluded the investigation with the verdict she desired. No definitive proof had been established against Mary Stuart. In reality, the English queen had no intention of either condemning or absolving her cousin, as doing so would have had significant political consequences. There was never any intention of conducting a formal trial. With the inquiry concluded, James Stuart returned to Scotland, while Mary remained in English custody. But this outcome served a strategic purpose. Elizabeth ensured that Scotland remained under Protestant rule without having to either condemn or release a fellow monarch. Many historians still consider this one of the strangest legal proceedings in history, as it ended without either an acquittal or a conviction. One party returned home, while the other remained a prisoner. On January 26, 1569, Mary Stuart was moved to Tutbury Castle. Elizabeth viewed her as a serious threat due to her claim to the English throne and therefore confined her in inland estates, far from both London and the Scottish border and safely away from the coast. The Scottish queen was allowed to retain her own servants, though never more than 16, and required 30 wagons to transport her belongings whenever she was relocated. Her sheets were changed daily, and her meals were prepared by her own cooks and served on silverware. In early 1570, Mary's half-brother, James Stuart, was assassinated. His death coincided with the Northern Rebellion, led by Catholic earls, further convincing Elizabeth's advisors that Mary posed a grave danger. After 18 years of captivity in England, Mary had been implicated in one conspiracy after another. Elizabeth's counselors repeatedly urged the queen to eliminate her for good, through execution, thus removing the threat permanently. Yet Elizabeth hesitated. On one hand, executing a monarch chosen by divine right seemed unthinkable. On the other, she feared that Catholic rulers across Europe might retaliate against England. Finally, Elizabeth's advisors managed to infiltrate Mary's circle with spies and link her to the Babington plot. Arrested on August 11, 1586, Mary was confronted with letters implicating her in a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and seize the English throne. She was taken to Fotheringhay Castle, arriving on September 25th, and was put on trial. During the trial, she denied all charges and appealed to the judge's conscience, reminding them that the world's stage was far greater than the Kingdom of England. She argued that she had not been allowed to see the evidence against her, that her documents had been confiscated, that she had been denied legal counsel, and that, as she was not an English subject, she could not be convicted of treason. Despite her protests, on October 25th, she was sentenced to death. Elizabeth hesitated to sign the execution warrant, even under pressure from Parliament. She feared that executing a queen would set a dishonorable precedent. However, after relentless insistence, she finally signed the sentence on February 1st, 1587. Mary was informed on February 7th that she would be executed the following morning. She spent her final hours in prayer, distributing her belongings among her servants, and writing both her will and a letter to the King of France. Meanwhile, a black scaffold was erected in the great hall of Fotheringhay Castle. The next morning, Mary faced her fate with great dignity. The executioner knelt before her and begged for forgiveness. She replied, "I forgive you with all my heart, for now I hope you will put an end to all my troubles." Facing her destiny with serenity and strength, even in her final moments, she consoled her grieving attendants. When her cloak was removed, it was revealed that she was wearing deep red, the liturgical color of Catholic martyrdom. A white veil, embroidered in gold, was placed over her eyes. Her last words were, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." Mary was not beheaded with a single stroke. The first blow missed her neck and struck the back of her head. The second severed nearly all of it, leaving only a small piece of sinew, which the executioner had to cut through with the third strike. He then lifted the head and declared, "God save the Queen." At that moment, Mary's auburn hair detached. It had been a wig. Her head fell to the ground, revealing short hair, completely white. It is said that a small dog had been hidden beneath her skirts. It refused to leave its mistress's body and was found covered in her blood. It was forcibly removed and taken away. Mary, Queen of Scots, died at the age of 44, and her legend was born right there, on that scaffold, in that gruesome spectacle. She was undoubtedly a captivating and enigmatic woman, but also reckless, impulsive, and stubborn. Dangerous traits for a queen, even more so in the 16th century. She lost the political game she had played for decades against her cousin and rival, Elizabeth I. Her final wish was to be buried in her beloved France, where she had spent her happiest years. However, her request was ignored, and she was instead laid to rest in an English cathedral. Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603, childless, bringing an end to the Tudor dynasty. The next in line to the throne was James VI of Scotland, Mary Stuart's son, who also became James I of England, and in 1612, 25 years after his mother's death, King James I arranged a grand procession through England to transfer Mary Stuart's remains to Westminster Abbey. And in a twist of fate, he buried her very close to the tomb of Elizabeth I. Elizabeth had won the battle against Mary in life, but her dynasty ended with her. And through her son, Mary Stuart became the ancestor of every monarch to have sat on the English throne ever since.